here we are. And thank you if you're tuning in. Appreciate it. Thanks even more for all the subscribers. I saw this silly notification this morning that I was number 15 in art and illustration for whatever that means. Honestly, though, Substack needs a photography section because all of us photographers came over here, not because it's necessarily a photocentric platform, but it does very good for us who's trying to write and post pictures and notes and all this other good stuff. So I love sharing all the things, but I kind of lumped in there with really big names, really good artists, and we're just different. Anyway, what is it to talk about today? And that is this dirty little secret that everyone in photography, especially if you're into wildlife photography, and that's teleconverters. Okay. These are lenses that you put on an existing lens to increase the magnification of your lens. And they come in a variety of shapes and sizes and magnifications. And so they are literally another lens that you put onto your existing lens, and depending on your format, they come in different sizes. So this is a teeny little thing. This is the Olympus OM system teleconverter, and it's like super small, right? But it's got a lens in there. You can see that there's glass in there. No. And you mount this to the lens, and then the lens, so it goes between your camera body and your lens itself. And in my case, this is a 1.4x teleconverter. You'll also find 2x or doublers teleconverters. And then sometimes, like Nikon had for a while there in their F mount, they have a 1.7x teleconverter. So the magnification is simply what you do. You take your lens, and if let's say you have I don't know, let's say you have a 300 millimeter lens, you multiply 300 times the factor of your teleconverter. So let's multiply that times 1.4. I can do the math here, and you get 420. So your lens is now a 420 millimeter equivalent lens with the teleconverter. You use a 2x, and now you have a 600 millimeter lens. So what happens is that at first glance, a lot of my clients and people who follow my writing early on, I did a YouTube video on this a million years ago. They you want to get more reach because you're trying to take pictures of animals, birds, or sports, whatever, right? And you say, well, I have this 70 to 200 millimeter lens, or I have a 70 to 300 millimeter lens. It didn't cost me very much. I'll just put a teleconverter on it. And that's where you start running into a bunch of problems because there's a lot of gotchas when you start using teleconverters. Okay. So the first gotcha is straight up compatibility. So when we take something like the 2x teleconverter, and this is true with a lot of them, you will notice that the front element on this teleconverter, so this is the front part that goes into the lens, has a protruding piece of glass. There's this sticks into something. So if I were to say, hey, I have a 2x converter and I want to, I got this nice 40 to 150 millimeter lens. It's an f4 lens. Okay, it didn't cost me an arm and a leg. This is great because if I take this and add it to my 150, now I'm at 300. And on micro four thirds, that's really like 600, right? So because it's 2x crop. Okay, well, sounds great until you take off the rear cap. And if you look at that, there's nowhere for this teleconverter to actually physically mount in. It doesn't work. You can't do it. So it's physically incompatible. So the lower end lenses, I mean, this one has a little bit of a recess, but there's other lenses that will have even less of a recess. Although I wouldn't want to use a teleconverter on something like this. This is a 12 to 40, so a 24 to 80. But you can see on here, there's literally, I'll get that in the light. there's nowhere for that teleconverter to even attach to the lens. So the first thing you do before you go out and spend any money on one of these accessories is make sure that whatever you're using is compatible. Hey, Kat, I just saw that you joined. Good to see you too. Um, a lot of familiar names coming in there. We're like cross pollinating across the Substacks. Isn't that cool? Um, don't mind me, I'm rambling. All right. So compatibility, that's number one. So if it's compatible and you can put the teleconverter on your lens, great, you've just magnified. Now, what is the other downside that they're not telling you about? Well, the other downside is the loss of light. So here, stay with me here for a minute. When you put this extra piece of glass in, there's more refractive surfaces, and the amount of light coming into your camera is reduced. Now, how much is it reduced? Well, it depends on the magnification of your teleconverter. Um, so, what do? You can actually calculate this. You have to multiply your lens's maximum aperture by the factor of your teleconverter. What does that mean? Okay, so let's take, for example, um, this lens here, which is compatible with the teleconverter. It's also a lot bigger and a lot more expensive. So this is the big brother to this little lens here. So this is my travel lens. This is more of a wildlife lens, right? So this is an f2.8 constant aperture zoom. 2.8, you multiply that by 1.4, and you will have one f-stop of light less coming in. So my little calculator here, I don't need it, but 2.8 times 1.4 equals 3.92. In other words, your 2.8 lens just became an f4 lens. Okay. So that only gets worse as you go slower. So if you have an an f4 lens and you put a 1.4 teleconverter on it, it's now an f5.6 lens in terms of how much light it's able to gather. What does that mean? It means that, well, your exposures, less light's coming in the camera. Even if you're shooting wide open, you need to bump up your ISO a little bit, all those consequences. Now, you do that same thing with a 2x converter, and you have to multiply your f-stop by 2. So that 2.8 lens here with a 2x teleconverter, I'll see if I can put it on here. Okay, there it goes. See, this one actually mounts. So f2.8, 2x converter. If you do the math at home, I hate numbers, but now my 2.8 becomes a 5.6 lens. So you can see where I'm going with this, maybe. Because the less expensive lenses, they tend to be slower. They tend to start at, say, f4 or 5.6, or some of them will have variable apertures. Here's an example of one of those. Now, this is a nice little lens, and if you're into wildlife photography, there is no better value for Micro Four Thirds users than this lens itself. This is a 100 to 400 zoom, but this thing had a variable aperture. So yes, I can put a teleconverter on it. It has enough recess. It is compatible, but this lens starts at f5, and when you zoom it out all the way and you go extend, we're now at f6.3. So that, because this is a variable aperture lens, what does that mean? You're shooting at the long end. Okay, I'm at 400. I put on my 1.4 teleconverter at f6.3. Now I got to use my calculator. So 6.3 times 1.4 is a number. It's 8.8. In other words, f9. Consequence. Now you're really getting into high ISO land. And if I were to put a 2x TC on this lens, 6.3 times 2, that is f12.6, so almost basically f13. Now, what's the consequence of this besides the light? Okay, you're going to have the exposure challenge. Now, all of a sudden, f13, hey, it's dark. And if you're shooting in lower light conditions, you're not going to be able to achieve the necessary shutter speeds, even if you boost your ISO way the heck up there. So that's a problem. And it's why you don't always want to use a teleconverter. On the other hand, there are other consequences with using teleconversion. Some of this is going to depend on the system that you use. Okay. When I did my last time, I talked about teleconverters. Again, this was like 15 years ago on YouTube. I was shooting with my Nikon system and, 35 millimeter full frame system F mount. And DSLRs vary in their autofocus systems, and they're different than some of the newer mirrorless camera focusing systems. So with a DSLR, and especially depending on your brand, Canon was a little bit better than this. But what would happen was if the aperture, the effective aperture, shall we say, became uh, smaller, the number was larger than say f8. What would happen is that you might only have one autofocus point that actually functioned in your camera. You could use, if it autofocused at all, it might be the center one. And for the longest time, I don't think Nikon F mount cameras, DSLRs, would autofocus at anything slower than f5.6. It was later on that they got some effectiveness. Because that's one thing. Your autofocus might start to fail because there's just not enough light coming in. All right. So now you have a camera that it becomes manual focus lens, and that's not really ideal either, or just using the center one. Can slow down the focus too. So if you're trying to take pictures of twitchy little birds, which I try all the time, using that TC, if you're shooting at an F 12 combo or something like that, F11, focus might not work. Now, the good news is if you move up to newer mirrorless cameras, they have much more sensitive autofocus systems. It's right on the sensor. There's no extra electronics in there to autofocus. It does it right on the sensor. And these cameras are quite good and can focus even at much slower effective apertures, meaning you can use a teleconverter in combos that would have been impossible with a DSLR. Okay, so that's just an aside. But even then, you're still going to have the light penalty. You're still going to have the aperture penalty. And your autofocus may not be as accurate just because that effective depth of field now is so much greater. The camera can't quite tell the difference between, the eyeball and tip of a nose. It might consider it to be in focus. Okay. So what does this all mean? It means that, I forgot to talk about the last, potential pitfall here, and that's degrading the optical quality. Okay. So we all gear nerds, we talk about sharp lenses and quality and that kind of stuff, right? Well, it turns out that your magnifying glass here, your teleconverter, is going to magnify any optical defects that might be inherent in your lens. All right, what does that mean? Well, it means that the edges, the corner sharpness might fall off a lot more. If there's aberrations, you're going to magnify them. You're going to see them. You're going to degrade the lens performance. Now, a lot of that has to then go back to what lens are you putting this, accessory on? If you start off and you've got, and you have, a big bank account, maybe you have something like a 600 millimeter f4 or a 400 millimeter f2.8. These are $15,000 lenses these days for the new ones, the Nikons, the Canon, the Sony. These are insanely priced. You could buy a car for what you get for these lenses. But they're going to be damn good glass. So when you put a teleconverter on them, you don't get the optical quality fall off that you might get. The other thing too is the quality of the teleconverter. If you stick with the teleconverters for your particular brand, and this is the Olympus one, the OM system one, they're going to be matched to that glass much better than if you buy a third party teleconverter. Now, third-party teleconverters have been around for a long time. I used to have one because they didn't always have the same limitations of what you could mount them on. Their design was different. They tended to not have this protruding piece here. So I had I think it was like Kenko or somebody made teleconverters long, long time ago, and you could use them on lenses that the Nikon teleconverters just simply weren't compatible with. It was a compatibility thing. But you put a lower grade piece of glass behind a, consumer grade lens, and you just suddenly, really degrade the image. So what I tell people is if you're trying to get to that magic number, 500, 600 millimeters or whatever, the end of the day, the teleconverters are really the best idea when you're using the OEM teleconverters, your brand with a good quality fast lens. Okay. So I've put teleconverter on this. Okay. I have, and I've tried, and it actually works. So the camera will focus even at F 13, F 12. All right. Or use the 1.4 converter. But it slows things down. And it puts you in a situation where you get back home and you look at all your pictures and they're all soft and they're not focused correctly. And you might be more disappointed than if you had just shot regularly. So the rules of teleconverters sort of go back down the list. The first thing is make sure they're compatible and they will mount to your lens. The second thing is the faster lens you have, the better, because you're going to lose light. In general, the lower magnification teleconverters will be less degrading to your image quality than the higher magnification ones. But there are exceptions. Like I was using a 2x converter last week on that new 50 to 200 millimeter OM system lens. So I was getting at 5.6, equivalent of 800 millimeters. It worked pretty well. It wasn't perfect, but it worked pretty darn well. It was, when it focused right, it was definitely sharp. I didn't have any optical issues. So you're going to lose light. Your aperture matters, the quality of your lens matters, and your compatibility matters. So all of those things are important considerations. So before you do that, do a little homework. Don't buy the super inexpensive third-party teleconverter necessarily. Read the reviews. One great thing you can do if you're interested in, buying accessories such as this is check out the used market, because a lot of times you're going to find teleconverters that were really not heavily used, and they're going to be showing up for 30% less than if you bought it new. I certainly bought this one used and saved a pretty penny. So that's what I've got today. I keep these kind of short because I don't really have anyone to really chat with. I see the comments coming through, so it is good to see you guys down there in the comments. Drop me a heart if you like this. I appreciate it. I will post this, when the replay comes out, I'll post it I'll throw in some links there so you can do a product search for teleconverters. I do appreciate your support. If you buy through B&H from my links, I get a little fractional commission, so it helps. We starving artists, as we joke about. So once again, I'm going to sign off. I do have, one other reminder though, is that my monthly Zoom hangout for my paid subscribers is going to be tomorrow afternoon on Wednesday. So if you are a paid subscriber, you will get a link for that in your email or notifications going out tomorrow. So I really appreciate everybody who subscribes either way. It's all good. I try to keep most of the stuff open and free. So my latest post today happened to be a very technical one. So that's for all you guys who are willing to shell out the monthly subscription. But I really do appreciate it. It really helps around here, especially being self-employed for as long as I've been doing this. Every little bit helps. So thanks again for tuning in today, and I'll see you again soon, I hope. All right. Take care, guys.